They said I was just a placeholder. Then they voted me out. At my own company. That's what they told me right before changing the locks and removing my name from the website. No warning, no conversation, just a cold email and silence in the boardroom. But I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just closed my laptop and walked out with something they forgot, a signed copy of the founding agreement, and a lawyer who once told me, if you ever need me, I'll show up. 6 months later, they were still fighting over chairs and titles, while I signed the paperwork to acquire the majority stake, and this time, no vote was needed. I didn't build Civic Line for glory. I built it because I believed in something. Back in 2018, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Austin, Texas, scraping by on freelance IT jobs, pouring every spare dollar into the idea of making local government easier to access. My name's Jenna Cross, and yes, I was the original blueprint behind the Civic Line software, the public data management tool that made waves across Texas municipalities. I didn't have connections. I didn't have a degree from Stanford. I didn't even have stable Wi-Fi half the time. What I did have was obsession, the kind that keeps you awake until 3 a.m., tweaking code and praying the server doesn't crash. So when I met Ethan, Leah, and Marcus, 3 business grads with angel investor contacts, I thought I struck gold. We formed the company on a handshake and hope. They had the suits, I had the product. And for a while, it worked. They let me code, let me lead, let me build the beta version that got us our first $200K in city contracts. But as the numbers grew, so did the whispers. Jenna's brilliant, but she's not really leadership material. We need someone more polished. She's too attached emotionally, it clouds her judgment. They didn't say it to my face. They said it inside meetings I wasn't invited to. In Slack threads I was removed from. In investor Zoom calls where my camera was always conveniently disabled. I kept telling myself it was paranoia, but paranoia has a funny way of becoming proof. It was a Friday afternoon, late August, hot enough to melt plastic off your car seats, and my inbox pinged. Subject leadership transition proposal. I opened it, read it once, then twice, and then I sat there for a full 5 minutes, just staring. They called it a strategic realignment, but it was a vote. To remove me from the CEO position, effective immediately. No meeting, no discussion, just done. They framed it as unanimous, said it was in the best interest of the company's long-term vision. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my chair across the room and demand answers. But instead, I shut my laptop, slid it into my backpack, and walked out of the office with my shoulders straight and my eyes dry. What they didn't know was that I had kept everything, the founding documents, my original ownership breakdown, the IP agreement that I drafted myself, and one more thing, a copy of the incorporation paperwork, signed by all 4 founders, filed before Ethan changed the name on the cap table. I didn't run, I planned, because you don't get to erase the person who built the machine and expect them not to know where every wire leads. They voted me out, but that was just the beginning. I didn't cry in my car. Not that day. Not when the elevator doors closed. Not when I passed the receptionist who wouldn't meet my eyes. I drove straight to my apartment, parked, sat still, then opened my fireproof lockbox, the one no one else knew existed. Inside it was everything. The incorporation agreement, IP ownership, equity division before the cap table ever changed hands. All signed, all dated, all legal. I didn't know exactly what I'd do yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to post a sad message on LinkedIn or start a new company out of bitterness. No, I was going to reclaim what was mine. Silently, strategically, brick by brick. I spent the next week making calls, not to friends, not to lawyers, to one man, Victor Albright. He was the first investor who ever believed in Civic Line. He backed us with $100K when we only had a prototype and a pitch deck full of typos. And he told me once over stale coffee and cold pancakes that if I ever needed him, really needed him, he'd show up. So I called. Jenna, he answered, voice warm with surprise. Victor, I said, I'm not calling for sympathy. I'm calling for a deal. There was a pause, then a laugh. God, I missed you. Come by tomorrow. Victor didn't ask for drama. He asked for numbers. I gave him projections, city contract renewals, growth velocity. I explained how Civic Line was planning a Series A round soon, probably within 6 months. He listened, nodded, then leaned forward and asked, "What's the play?" I took a deep breath. I want to own a controlling stake before they even realize I'm in the game. And you need a holding company. Exactly. We built it that week. JNC Holdings LLC, registered in Delaware, clean paperwork, private beneficial ownership, no trace of my name publicly attached. Through that entity, we began reaching out to minor investors from earlier safe rounds. Some of them hadn't heard from Civic Line in months. Others were frustrated with delayed reports, misaligned direction, or just plain bored. I didn't beg. I just offered above-market buybacks, all handled through Victor's firm. Within 10 weeks, JNC Holdings controlled nearly 18% of Civic Line's shares, silent, clean, untraceable. And then I waited, because timing is everything. While they were prepping for their funding round, I started mapping the exact people who would matter when a proxy vote happened. Not the loud ones, not the founders, the quiet investors, the ignored voices, the ones who still remembered who wrote the first lines of Civic Line's code, the ones who remembered me. I flew to Chicago to meet Carla Reynolds. She owned 4% and had never been invited to a single strategy meeting. I sat with Harold Green in Phoenix. He was considering writing off his entire investment. And in each of those conversations, I didn't pitch a sob story. I offered clarity and a seat at a table they were never invited to. By the time Civic Line sent out their official Series A deck to new VCs, JNC Holdings had already crossed the 32% ownership mark, and they had no idea until the email came from Ethan. "Hi Jenna, hope you're doing well. Quick question, have you heard of a firm called JNC Holdings? They've been buying up quite a bit of our early equity." I stared at the screen, smiled, then typed, "Sounds familiar. I'll look into it." I didn't send it. I deleted it and went back to planning the final move. I knew once the round was live, they'd be desperate for capital. Desperate means leverage, and leverage is how you flip the table. 3 days later, Victor forwarded me a document draft terms for a $2 million investment from JNC Holdings, contingent on full proxy voting rights and 1 new board seat. I reviewed it, signed it, and waited, because the only thing better than being CEO is being the person who chooses who gets to be CEO. They thought they erased me, but the problem with erasing a founder is that we remember every line of the blueprint. They underestimated how much a quiet woman can see. In meetings, I took notes. In silence, I read every contract, every clause, every dilution trigger. And now that silence had turned into a map. What they forgot was that I didn't need to be in the room to be in control. I just needed access, and I already had it. JNC Holdings became the quiet heartbeat of Civic Line. We weren't loud, we weren't flashy, but we were always there. And then came the tipping point. Marcus went rogue, pushed a rushed vendor partnership with a firm in Dallas that hadn't been vetted. The deal blew up. 2 cities pulled out. The board panicked. Suddenly, they were scrambling. And Victor, playing both sides, perfectly suggested JNC Holdings increase their offer. We revised the term sheet, $3.5 million, board restructuring, and immediate voting power. They hesitated, then relented. They had no choice, and that's when I made my first public move. At the next board meeting, held on the 17th floor of the Monarch building downtown, I walked in with Victor. Not as a guest, not as a former CEO, but as the largest stakeholder in the room. Leah's face went pale. Ethan's jaw locked. Marcus couldn't even look at me. The chair asked who I was. I smiled. "Jenna Cross, representing JNC Holdings." You could have heard a pin drop. They thought I came to gloat, to humiliate, but I didn't. I came to vote, and I voted to restructure the board, effective immediately. I wasn't angry, I wasn't loud, I was prepared. Prepared to take back what they tried to steal. Not with revenge, with ownership. Because sometimes, the loudest move you can make is done in silence, with a signature, and a chair at the head of the table. After the vote, They didn't speak. Not right away. There were a few forced smiles, a lot of cleared throats, and I didn't need to explain myself, because every document spoke for me, every line I'd written, every clause I'd highlighted. It had all been pointing to this moment. That night, I went home and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving since the first pilot contract was signed in 2019. I drank alone, no toast, no victory speech, just silence. The kind that tastes like justice. Over the next few weeks, the company shifted. Leah stepped down. Marcus left for a different startup. Ethan tried to negotiate a role for himself. I gave him a 3-month consulting contract. Nothing more. Civic Line became something new. Not just a business, not just software, but proof. Proof that erasing someone doesn't make them disappear. Proof that silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. I didn't need revenge. I needed results. And now, every dollar that flows through that system, every contract signed, it all runs through a company owned by the woman they voted out. Sometimes the best way to win is not to fight at all. It's to wait. And then, to buy the whole damn game. They didn't congratulate me. Not when I took my seat at the boardroom table. Not when the press release named JNC Holdings as the new majority shareholder. Not when my signature finalized the revised governance agreement. They nodded, smiled tight, clapped like they had something bitter under their tongues. But they didn't say it. Didn't say the one thing they were all thinking, that the woman they voted out had just bought them out. I wasn't looking for apologies. I wasn't chasing validation. I was building something. And when you're building, truly building ego is the first thing you bury. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved quietly, held one-on-ones with department leads, audited the product roadmap, checked financial burn, pulled marketing metrics. There were inefficiencies everywhere, inflated vendor contracts, redundant hires, a bloated leadership team that hadn't shipped a new feature in 6 months. I didn't fire people, not immediately, but I started asking questions no one had asked in a long time. The kind of questions that make a room go still. Like, why are we spending $12,000 a month on a contractor with 0 commits to the repo? Or can someone walk me through why our onboarding funnel hasn't changed since 2020? The silence after those questions said more than any report. Leah was the first to crack. She pulled me aside after a strategy meeting, said she wanted to take a step back. She used phrases like new chapter and personal growth. I just nodded, wished her luck. Marcus followed a few days later, said he was exploring an opportunity in Miami, left behind a mess of half-signed vendor agreements and a Dropbox full of outdated mock-ups. That left Ethan, who once called me a brilliant back-end engineer with poor executive instincts. Ethan, who had lobbied the hardest to remove me as CEO. He came to me with a proposal, offered to stay on as a transitional advisor, said he knew the investors, could help with optics. I thanked him, and handed him a 3-month contract, advisory only. No decision-making authority. His eyes flickered, but he signed, because he knew what I knew. That Civic Line wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. With the leadership reshuffled, I turned to the product. The original code base was still there, my code. They had built layers on top of it, some good, most clunky. I pulled in a new CTO, hand-picked, someone I mentored years ago, someone who knew the DNA of the platform. We rebuilt from the core out. Meanwhile, the city contracts began to renew. Austin, San Antonio, Fort Worth. But this time, clients spoke directly to me, to the woman who had been in their IT rooms, debugging at midnight during rollout week. They remembered. They always remembered. 6 months after taking back control, Civic Line had trimmed its overhead by 27%, shipped 2 major updates, landed a pilot with the state of Arizona, and won an award for government innovation at the GovTech Expo. The headline read, "Once ousted CEO, leads come back with bold civic tech vision." I didn't repost it, didn't need to. The people who needed to see it already had. One day, while reviewing our contract pipeline, I got an email from Carla Reynolds, She had sold me her equity months earlier, quietly. Now she wrote, "You earned it. Every damn bit of it. Just wanted you to know." I stared at that line. And for the first time in a long time, I leaned back and exhaled. Because it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my narrative, rewriting the part they tried to erase. I was never just the placeholder, never just the back-end girl, never just the founder who got lucky. I was always the engine, the root system beneath the product. And now, the face at the helm. It wasn't loud, it wasn't viral, it was something better, permanent, undeniable, and mine. The funny thing about silence is it echoes. Long after the noise has faded, I started to hear from people who had once ghosted me, a marketing manager who never returned my emails, an ex-partner who had once laughed when I pitched Civic Line from a folding table at a civic fair. Now they reached out to reconnect, to collaborate. Some even asked if there were open roles. I smiled, sent them to HR, told myself I wouldn't be petty, and for the most part, I wasn't. But there was one moment, one small, sharp moment. I was in a panel discussion for female founders in tech. Midway through, the moderator asked what advice I'd give to someone who's been pushed out. I paused, looked straight into the crowd, and said, "You don't need to yell, you don't need to fight, you need to watch, remember, and rebuild." The room went quiet, and somewhere in the back, I saw someone lower their phone, maybe recording, maybe not. But I didn't flinch, because I had nothing to hide anymore. 1 year to the day after I was voted out, I stood in the same office, under the same company logo, except this time, I was signing a 3-year government-wide integration deal with the state of Texas, the biggest contract in our company's history. I looked around the room, new team, new energy, new vision, but the walls were the same, the coffee stain in the corner, the nick in the conference table, reminders of where I had been and how far I had come. Ethan sent a congratulations text. I didn't reply. Some stories don't need a second chapter. They need closure, and I had it. I built Civic Line twice, once from scratch and once from rubble, but the second time, it was mine alone. With every contract, every hire, every line of code, we built something that couldn't be taken from me again. Because now, it didn't just have my name, it had my blueprint, my scars, my silence, and that silence, it spoke louder than they ever expected. I didn't build this version of Civic Line to prove anything to them. I built it for the girl I used to be. The one who sat in a folding chair at 2 a.m., debugging a server with trembling fingers. The one who believed, fiercely and foolishly, that good systems could fix broken cities. The one who got laughed out of demo day because her pitch didn't have flashy graphics. She deserved this, not for the applause, but for the dignity, for the quiet, for the moment when someone would finally ask, "Who built this?" And the answer would be undeniable. I still keep the original whiteboard sketch, the one with my messy handwriting and color-coded arrows. It hangs behind my desk now, framed, not as a trophy, but as a promise. A promise that no matter who tries to erase you if you know who you are, you're never really gone. They voted me out, so I became the owner. And this time there was no vote, just a signature and a silence they'll never forget. Power changes people, or maybe it just reveals them. 6 months after I took over Civic Line, the spotlight arrived. Podcasts, panels, profiles in Forbes and Wired. They called me the comeback queen of civic tech. They told my story like it was a fairy tale, like the betrayal had been a chapter, not a wound, but what they didn't see, what no article captured, was what came next. Because surviving betrayal is one thing, leading after it, that's something else entirely. There's a weight that comes with being back at the top, a kind of invisible pressure that whispers, "Don't mess it up this time." Don't let them say you're emotional. Don't give them a reason to say you never should have come back. So I didn't sleep much. I triple-checked everything, met every deadline, answered every call. I said yes to every opportunity even when I was drowning. Because I thought I had to prove I deserved it, not just once, but over and over again. Every damn day. Until one Thursday morning, I opened my inbox and felt my stomach drop. Subject line, urgent legal review needed. Potential IP dispute. The email came from our general counsel. Apparently, a former contractor someone hired under Marcus's leadership was claiming ownership of a key automation tool in our software suite. They'd filed a complaint, threatened litigation. And the worst part, their name wasn't on any of the paperwork, but neither was mine. Because back then, we didn't document contributions properly. We were too busy scaling, too busy surviving. For 3 days, I barely ate, barely spoke. My head was full of worst-case scenarios, loss of license, product rollback, investor panic, and beneath it all, the question that kept clawing at my ribs. Did I miss something? Did I let this happen? I met with legal. We combed through every contract, every commit log, every Slack thread from 3 years ago. Nothing clean, nothing airtight. But then, I remembered something, a random memory. A screen recording I once took to test a UI bug. It had been stored in an old private Notion page. I logged in, scrolled past pages of dusty prototypes and forgotten feature maps, and there it was, a time-stamped screen capture, showing me writing the first logic loop of that automation tool, alone, weeks before that contractor was even hired. I stared at it, and felt something rise in my throat. Not tears, not relief, just fury. Fury at the idea that even after everything I'd done, every ounce of myself I'd poured into this company, someone still thought they could take it from me. Rewrite the history I'd bled to create. I forwarded the recording to our lawyers, filed a counterclaim, and froze their attempt before it even reached a courtroom. But I didn't stop there. I hired a new head of compliance, instituted a policy of contribution tracking so granular, it could timestamp a thought. We'd never be vulnerable like that again. Because revenge stories don't end when you win. They evolve. They ask, now that you've got the power, how will you use it? And I knew my answer. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my career looking over my shoulder. I was going to build forward. I made CivicLine open source in part, gave free access to the nonprofit module for underfunded cities, and launched a fellowship for women in government tech who'd been underestimated, dismissed, or sidelined. Every applicant read the same quote at the top of the page. They voted me out, so I became the owner. Some said it was petty, others called it powerful. I didn't care what they called it. I knew what it was. A line in the sand. A marker. For every girl coding in her dorm room. For every woman passed over because her voice wasn't executive enough. For every founder forced to start over from scratch. CivicLine's growth tripled that quarter. We entered talks with 5 new states, and in the fall, I flew to D.C. to present a keynote at the National Civic Innovation Summit. It wasn't just a tech talk, it was a reclamation. I stood under those lights and told the truth about what happened, about what it cost, about what came after. The audience rose to their feet, not because I was perfect, but because I was proof. Proof that silence isn't the same as surrender, that power, when wielded wisely, can rebuild more than just a company. It can rebuild a legacy. So when people ask me now, was it worth it? Was all that silence, all that planning, all that pain worth it? I smile, and I say it wasn't revenge, it was restoration. That night, after the summit, I walked alone to the Lincoln Memorial, not to be poetic, just to breathe, to feel the weight of it all settle. The marble steps were cold beneath me, and for the first time in years, I let myself be still. No dashboards, no deadlines, no decisions, just quiet, and the thought, you made it back. Not everyone does. Some never recover from being pushed out. Some shrink to survive. But I didn't just survive. I evolved. I came back smarter, sharper, softer in some places, stronger in others, and with a sense of clarity I'd never had before. Because now I knew I don't need a seat at anyone else's table. I know how to build my own, plank by plank, vote by vote, until the table is mine. Until the room listens when I speak. Not because I raise my voice, but because they remember what happened the last time they ignored it. They voted me out, but what they didn't realize was that the moment they pushed me aside, they handed me the blueprint for taking it all back. So I built, silently, relentlessly, and now every foundation they stand on was poured with my hands. When I returned to Austin, there was a letter waiting for me, handwritten, no return address. Inside, a simple note. You showed us what leadership really looks like. Thank you for not giving up. There was no name, but I didn't need one. Because that's the thing about legacy, it echoes in places you'll never see. In people you'll never meet. And that's when I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every person who's ever been underestimated. Every founder who got shut out of their own creation. Every builder told they weren't polished enough. Every woman who walked out of a room she deserved to lead just to return one day and own the building. That's what this was. Not a comeback, a return, a reclaiming. And if I've learned anything, it's this: let them vote. Let them whisper. Let them lock the door. Because when the time is right, you won't knock. You'll have the keys. There's something eerie about walking into the same room. Twice. Once as the woman they pushed out, and once as the woman they now have to answer to. The boardroom hadn't changed. Same glass walls, same too bright LED lighting, same chairs where I once sat quietly, hoping they'd hear me. This time, they didn't speak over me. This time, they waited. And when I spoke, they listened. Because silence, when wielded with precision, becomes command. And now, every word I said measured. Steady was backed by action, numbers, results, not theory, not assumption, but reality. Civic Line had gone from a messy startup to a national model. We were in 37 cities, 5 state-level pilots, 2 federal interest groups, and all of it every contract. Every release ran through a team I rebuilt from scratch, without them. They say success is the best revenge, but I don't believe that. Success is just the floor. The real revenge is ownership. Quiet. Undeniable. Permanent. That day. I gave a presentation on expansion strategy, walked the board through the upcoming integrations, our plans to license core modules, and the roadmap for national coverage. When I finished, the room was still. Then someone clapped, and then another, until the whole table followed. Not out of pity, not out of pressure, out of something far rarer: respect. Afterward, I went back to my office and sat at my desk, the same desk they had once boxed up. I stared out the window at the skyline, lights flickering on one by one. And I thought about the girl I was, the one who left this building with nothing but a laptop and a heartbeat full of fire. She never raised her voice, but she never forgot. And because of that, this office, this company, this moment belonged to her too. The girl who planned instead of begged, who studied instead of shouted, who built instead of broke. They didn't see her coming, but they never will forget her now. The final chapter wasn't loud. It wasn't a confrontation. It was something cleaner, something stronger. A reckoning made of balance sheets and board votes. Not revenge, restoration. Months later, I was invited to speak at a closed-door forum for displaced founders. There were only 12 of us in the room. And when it was my turn, I stood up, cleared my throat, and said, "You are not crazy, you are not weak, and you are not done. They voted you out, so what? Let them vote, let them celebrate, and while they do, you plan, you build, you buy it back. One signature at a time." I saw tears in eyes that had once only held rage. I saw women nod, silently. I saw the shift, and I knew then my story wasn't just survival, it was a blueprint. In the months that followed, Civic Line launched 2 new platforms, one focused on emergency response tech, the other on grant distribution for local governments. We doubled revenue, tripled job applications, and most importantly, we stayed human. No bloat, no ego, no forgetting who we serve. Because when you've been erased before, you don't rebuild for power. You rebuild for permanence. They used to whisper, "She's not the right fit." Now they say, "She changed the game, and I don't need a throne. I need roots, and I've planted them deep." In every code line, in every contract, in every quiet, calculated move I made, while they were laughing, that's what they'll remember. Not the noise I didn't make, but the empire I built. In silence. There were offers, big ones. Acquisition talks from major enterprise players. The kind of deals people dream about, the kind that come with private jets and golden handcuffs. But I turned them down. Not because I didn't want the money, but because Civic Line was never just an asset. It was my evidence. That I could be erased and still return. That I could lose everything and come back holding more. Besides, what do you trade for your name? For your voice, for your rightful place at the table? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So I stayed to grow it. Stayed to prove that you don't need to win fast to win forever. People asked how I did it. They wanted step-by-step guides, playbooks. But the truth, there was no formula. Just silence and strategy. And the relentless choice to keep going even when it hurt. Even when every voice told me I didn't belong. Even when my own doubt became the loudest thing in the room. You don't need to scream to shake the walls. Sometimes, you just have to stay standing. Longer than they thought you could. My mother once told me the world won't always clap when you walk in. But that doesn't mean the room isn't yours. It took me a decade to understand that. And now, I live it. Because Civic Line isn't just mine. It's a space for every voice that was once silenced. Every founder pushed out. Every builder told, "You're too soft, too quiet, too emotional." We're not too anything. We're enough, and we're here. I built an empire not to crush them, but to remind them that the person they tried to erase was the architect the whole time. There's a quiet kind of power that comes from being underestimated. They didn't think I'd last a month. They didn't think I had the spine to run a company, let alone reclaim it. But what they didn't know is that I wasn't built for applause. I was built for endurance, for strategy, for legacy. Now, when I walk through our new HQ twice the size of the old one, people nod. Not because I command them to, but because they know what it took. They know I wasn't handed this. I took it back. One woman asked me last week, "Do you ever forgive them?" I thought for a moment. Then I said, "Forgiveness isn't the point. They were part of the fire, but I'm the one who forged the steel." And that's the truth. Some people will only understand your value when they no longer have access to it. Some lessons don't need to be taught with words. They're learned in absence, in watching the person you tried to break build a tower you'll never reach. So, no, I don't need them to say they were wrong. I don't need an apology, because Civic Line stands, and I stand with it. A company, a comeback, a quiet, undeniable victory, signed not with noise, but with proof. And maybe that's what this story was always about. Not the fall, not even the return, but the quiet courage it takes to start again, to stand alone, to speak last, to sign the paper when your hands are still shaking from betrayal, to hold the door open after they slammed it in your face. My legacy won't be noise. It'll be architecture. It'll be systems that last, teams that thrive, and stories whispered between women late at night, saying, "She did it. So can we." They voted me out, so I became the owner, and in the end, that one sentence became my empire.